Section 2, Literacy Practices. In this section, we'll answer the question, what literacy practices can paraprofessionals use to support structured literacy in the classroom? Before we get into the specifics of structured literacy practices, it's important to note that speaking and listening are the foundational components of literacy. If the foundation of your house isn't strong, the structure will fail when you start building. Many special education students have speech delays and auditory processing disorders. This makes it difficult for them to speak and listen. Special education teachers and paraprofessionals may need to spend extra time building this foundation for students with disabilities. Some students may receive speech therapy to help with this as well. In many cases, offering extra opportunities to practice speaking and listening will help students. Paraprofessionals can help build these skills by having conversations with students and encouraging students to answer questions from peers or adults instead of always answering for them. When we talk about structured literacy, we're referring to a collective set of individual skills. The rest of Section 2 is going to define each of these 7 literacy skills and provide examples of how paraprofessionals can support the literacy instruction and intervention in classrooms. The graphic on this slide provides a loose scope and sequence of these skills. While we don't teach these skills in isolation, we do tend to focus more on the top skills, phonology and phonics, in the early grades, and spend more time on semantics and syntax in the upper grades. As described in the first section of this module, it is important that teachers are prepared to teach these skills in an explicit and systematic way. Many commercial reading and intervention programs are used to supplement school curriculum. As a paraprofessional, you may be asked to support the students by learning more about some of these programs. Be sure to ask any teachers you work with for more specific information about the programs they use in the classroom. Let's begin with phonology. Phonology is the patterns of sounds in our language. These skills can be done in the dark, meaning without print. Phonological awareness skills include rhyming, alliteration, sentence segmenting, syllables, onset and rhyme, and phonemes. Students typically begin building these skills in pre-K and kindergarten. For most children, learning to speak is innate. Babies begin to mimic the sounds they hear from their caregivers when they are just a few months old. The first skill to learn is how many words are in a sentence, so being able to distinguish sounds at the sentence level. For example, how many words are in the sentence, Sally had to go to the dentist yesterday afternoon? If you guess 9 words, you're correct. For some children, pulling apart small words, such as to go to, is difficult. They might think to go to is one word. As a paraprofessional, you may be asked to say sentences to children and have them count words. This helps them build their phonology skills. The next level is word level. This is where we may introduce rhyming words such as kite and bite. Paraprofessionals may be asked to give students 2 words and ask them to determine whether or not they rhyme. You also may be asked to give the student 2 words and have them determine if they have the same first sound, such as fish and feel, or the same ending sound, such as float and sat. Next, we can divide words into their spoken syllables, like fab, rick, or nap, kin. The most advanced phonological awareness skill is phonemic awareness. Phonemic awareness is the awareness of individual speech sounds or phonemes in spoken words, and it is the ability to manipulate these sounds in words. When a student has phonemic awareness, they can take a whole word like cat and orally break it into its speech sounds, k, at, or they can do the opposite. Take the sounds f, it, and blend them together to say the word fit. They can also manipulate sounds like say card. Now say it again without the D sound. Car. Or say tin. Now say the word, but change the N to a P. Tip. As a paraprofessional, you may be asked to play these type of sound games with students. As students get more confident, they usually like to play them. If students make a mistake, remember to immediately correct them. The next literacy skill to discuss is phonics. This is the process of connecting all those speech sounds to letters. Graphemes is another term for letters, and we have to teach students that sounds are represented by graphemes or letters in print. Now, the trouble is that we do not have enough letters in our alphabet to represent all of our speech sounds. We have about 40 sounds in the English language and only 26 letters. So sometimes a letter has to make more than one sound. Another confusing part is that sometimes the same sound can be represented by more than one letter. Think about the sound S. Sometimes we spell that with an S, like in the word bus. Sometimes we spell it with a C, like in the first sound in circus. In fact, many of our consonants represent more than one sound. Our vowels, A, E, I, O, U, also represent more than one sound as well, typically described by teachers as long and short vowel sounds. We also talk about how these individual letters are blended together to make words. For example, at are blended together to make hat and can also be segmented separately. Obviously, this is confusing for children, and as a paraprofessional, you may be asked to support students in learning phonics skills. Again, students who struggle with language delays may struggle with both phonology and phonics because they may not be processing all of the speech sounds accurately. Special education teachers and therapists can help guide paraprofessionals through the types of interventions which will work best for all students. After we introduce letters, we have to talk about orthography, which is spelling patterns. Now, many people like to say that spelling in English is difficult or there are too many exceptions to rules. But we actually have quite a bit of predictability in our spelling patterns, and they are governed by our 6 most common syllable types. The graphic on the screen shows those types. Again, this is a loose scope and sequence. Usually teachers will begin at the top types first, as they are considered easier and go along with the shorter words students tend to learn first and see in early reading books. Then we move down the table to the more complex syllable types. As a paraprofessional, you may be asked to have students practice these spelling types. Next, let's discuss morphology. This is when we teach meaningful word parts. Interestingly, 80% of words in our language are borrowed from other languages. Anglo-Saxon, also known as Old English, makes up a lot of our basic words. We also borrow science words from Latin and Greek. You may have even studied Latin in high school. We also borrow words from French and Spanish. Additionally, we invent new words. The Webster Dictionary continues to add new words every year. So let's talk more about how we teach students about morphology. When teaching students about meaningful word parts and how words are formed, we can think about some of our smallest word parts. Let's talk about bio. This is a Greek word root that means life. If we teach bio and then we teach graph, which means write, now students know what a biography is. When they learn auto, they then understand what autobiography means. And by adding other words to bio, they suddenly learn so many more words. Think of all the words that you know that begin with bio or have bio somehow in the word. When teaching morphology in the younger grades, we generally focus on prefixes and suffixes. What makes a word past tense versus future tense? What makes a word singular versus plural? Let's look at an example. Subsequently. The prefix sub means under. The root sequent means follow in a sequence. And the suffix ly means to act in a way. Now, when you put that all together, you can quickly get the meaning of something that occurs under something in a sequence. And a student-friendly definition might be something that occurs subsequently to do something else that occurs later in time. But think about all of the words that students could understand just based on knowing that the prefix sub means under and that the suffix ly means to act in a way. As a paraprofessional, you may be asked to help students work through these types of word studies because they open the door to a lot of meaningful words for students. Next, let's talk about semantics. Semantics is where we build on morphology to talk about the greater meaning of words, sentences, and phrases in context. This is where we begin to talk about the structure of writing. We teach students about an author's purpose for writing. Sometimes it is to inform, like when our history book is teaching us a lesson about a certain event. Sometimes an advertisement is written to persuade us to buy a particular product or service. And sometimes fictional text is written purely for our own enjoyment. But these three pieces of writing will have a different word choice and different meanings. This also leads to a discussion between fiction and nonfiction text and the types of vocabulary that are used in both. When we teach about semantics, we also focus on vocabulary in terms of a word's definition related to other words. In our language, we have many words that have multiple meanings. So how do we determine which definition is appropriate? We use the context of a sentence or a phrase. For example, the word bark has multiple meanings. In the sentence, the dog will bark at the cat, we are talking about the sound that a dog makes. In the sentence, the bark on the tree is brown, we are talking about the outer covering of a tree. The definition of bark in these sentences is dependent upon the other words because the word itself sounds and is spelled the same in both sentences. Semantics also covers synonyms and antonyms, which give shades of meaning to our language. Look at how we've enhanced that original sentence. The dog will bark at the cat. The gigantic brown mutt will loudly bark at the tiny white kitten. We've added synonyms, mutt for dog, kitten for cat, that give a great description of the kinds of animals being described. We've also added identifying features, gigantic, brown, tiny, and white. We've also added loudly to the word bark. All of this paints a very clear picture of what is going on in this story. As a paraprofessional, especially if you work with students in upper grades, you may be helping them enhance their writing, having them map out concepts or words using diagrams, such as the one pictured here, or even having them work with a thesaurus to use more sophisticated words in their writing. Many times, students will focus on common words like small, pretty, and bad, trying to get them to use more interesting words or more illustrative words, such as tiny, little, beautiful, gorgeous, terrible, and horrible, are all things that you can do to support the use of semantics. Next, we'll talk about syntax. This is the grammar component of structured literacy. This is the sequence and function of words in writing. This is where we teach about nouns, verbs, subjects, predicates, and how sentences are constructed to make sense. Here's an example of a sentence diagram. The sentence is, the dog brought me his old ball in the morning. In this sentence, dog is the subject noun. Brought is the predicate verb. Ball is the direct object. Me is the indirect object. In the morning is a prepositional phrase. And the, his, and old are all modifiers and articles. These are all parts of syntax and things that students learn as part of their structured literacy instruction in syntax. As a paraprofessional, you may be supporting students by helping them with sentence building activities, such as the one pictured here. In this activity, students are given word cards with different parts of a sentence and asked to put them in a correct order. Although pragmatics is not officially included in structured literacy instruction, it often plays an important role in the success of students with disabilities. Pragmatics is how language is used in social situations and conversations. Many students with disabilities struggle with social skills and engaging in conversations, especially related to academics. Paraprofessionals can help strengthen these skills by offering opportunities for students to interact with adults and peers. Providing conversation prompts when needed and asking open ended questions can help encourage students to speak more frequently in educational settings. You have now reached the end of Module 21. I hope you have found the content beneficial. Please complete all questions before submitting. Thank you for your important work as a paraprofessional.